Good morning, everyone. For those of you who are watching this in real time, I am returning after a 3-week absence. Personal responsibilities just took over all my time, and so I've had to take a break, which is now, I hope, ended. Okay, let us start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, dear friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to feel your living presence in our hearts, in our minds, and in our spirits, that we may move through this world as your instruments. Om peace. Amen. I love that phrase that I often use. Those of you who are watching this in real time, like, what does that actually mean? I know what it means. It means, like, in the moment I'm saying it, you're watching it or you're keeping up with me. But there's no such thing as real time, because the whole concept of time is an illusion. So this is what happens when you're too much of an intellectual. You can't function after a little while. So we'll just leave it. Today is Monday, and Monday is the day I remind you that you can support this work, which we call the Mission of the Masters, by going to Patreon, and you can sign up as a subscriber that way, or through PayPal or any of the donation transfer systems that there are. Mission of the Masters. And I'm extremely uplifted by the fact that so many of you consider this important enough to support. And by your help, we also passed the 10,000 mark in terms of subscribers to YouTube channel, which apparently will broaden the reach, which is just absolutely marvelous. So we are in the middle of going through Ananda's Festival of Light, which is the weekly ritual that is part of our Sunday satsang. Swami Kriyananda created this in the year 1986. And all of that is in the previous episodes to this. So we've been going through the allegory of the little bird and the stages of his journey from the revolt to the quest. And he's just gotten super serious about the quest. And I'm just going to reread the passage that we did the last time to put us in tune with what we're doing. Ever and again through your awakened sons. First, actually, I'm going to do the whole part there. The little bird begins to realize that it doesn't know what the heck that's going on, and all its great self-declared realities have been a total fizzle. The problem is, you see, when you put your opinion against what is always wins. And so the little bird put his opinion of how he wanted the world to operate, and he tried for a very long time. Sound familiar? To just say, but I want it to be different. There was a little boy. He was about 3 or 4 at the time. Very, very, very strong-willed lad. And he lived in one of our ashram houses, this 5-story house in San Francisco, with this huge wooden staircase that went up the middle of the house. And at 3 in the morning, he was just tired of not having anybody to play with and having nothing to do and being expected to lie in his bed. So he crawled out of his crib and he walked to the middle of the staircase. He was about on the 4th floor. And he shouted with all his strength, "I want it to be morning," just into the dark night. Of course, the sun did not rise merely because he was shouting, but it's always been such a dear image to my mind, because many times in my life I've stood at 3 in the morning and shouted into the night sky that I want it to be morning, and the world has responded about like it responded to that little kid. Interesting, but irrelevant. It's just not going to change. But So the little bird gets to that point, and he finally says, "From the depths of unknowing, Lord, we cry out to thee. Is there no lasting purpose to our lives? All that we thought was light was but darkness. Who are we in reality? For what end were we made?" All of a sudden, instead of declaring, we inquire. And then, ever and again, through your awakened sons, the answer comes. Meaning there are those enlightened souls who really know what causes suffering and what causes happiness. Because that's all we're working with. It's just we have an idea of where our suffering comes from. We try to solve our suffering. But if it's the wrong answer, it doesn't matter how intensely we apply it, it just will not bring the result. But ever and again through our awakened sons, the answer comes. The forming of stars and moons and planets, of galaxies revolving on the tides of space, of drifting continents, upheaving mountains, snowy wastes, dark, silent, ocean deeps, had but this for its design, the birth of life, and with life's birth, the dawn of self-awareness. That's what it all comes down to. If you look, interestingly, if you look back over your own life and watch any cycle that you consider progress, any cycle at all, on any level of your life, it's always an increase of awareness. If you're trying to learn to play a musical instrument, you become more and more adept at understanding how it's played. If you're trying to get along with someone and you begin to get along with them, it's because you've become more aware of their nature and your nature and what actions will bring harmony and what actions will bring disharmony. If you're trying to be a medical doctor, you become more aware of the way the body works and more aware of the solutions. It's always an increase of awareness. Even just the growth of a child. The child doesn't know how to do things, doesn't know how to tie its shoes, it doesn't know which part of the blouse goes over your head. It doesn't know how to find its own mouth with a spoon. It doesn't know that its own hands are not something to be afraid of. Little babies sometimes frighten themselves because their own hands flash in front of their face. They don't know it's their body. They don't have control over it. It's just they're lying there and then this fearsome thing comes in front of them. But of course, gradually they develop what? The awareness. And the greatest awareness is the awareness of who am I? Why was I born? What causes happiness? What causes suffering? And the entire journey of life, now we finish it, as I said before, with self-realization. And by then we put a capital S on it. I really find out who I really am. Self-awareness culminates in self-realization. And the degree to which we suffer and the degree to which we find happiness is in an exact proportion to our degree of self-awareness and ultimately our degree of self-realization. And bearing in mind, both the word awareness and realization are not that we're creating something. We're not making something that wasn't there. We're just learning about what is. You know, we are learning what is. And this is part of the fundamental revolt that the bird went through, representing all of us, is that there are enduring, eternal, unchangeable realities that are inherent in life itself, and we rebel against that. We just make up our own ideas about what it is, then we fiercely defend those ideas against all contrary evidence until we crash and burn and can't stand it any longer. And the suffering that our self-imposed ignorance creates in us becomes worse than the deep fear we have of facing another reality. And we're very afraid. It's just the way we're made. And why God did it, it's an awful trick, but there it is. The masters say that when you're finally free of it, you don't feel that it was unfair. But while we're going through it, it's pretty easy to stand in the stairwell and say that I want it to be morning. and feel that somebody should make it morning for us. Like once you start examining a lot of these prejudices and assumptions that we have, you realize they're nothing. They're just nothing. They're just clouds. They're just mist. But why do I think that? And then we just have this long self-justification. But it's just like they said that the philosopher, I think William James, I think his name was Henry James. I get confused. He was a philosopher, and he gave a lecture, and he was talking about the nature of the universe. And this is probably apocryphal, but supposedly an elderly woman came up afterwards and told him that all that stuff that he was saying, it just wasn't true. It wasn't the way the world was made. He said, well, how is the world made? She said, well, the entire earth sits on the back of a giant turtle. And he was very interested, and he said, and what's underneath that turtle? She said, another giant turtle. And so he said, and under the second giant turtle? And the old woman said, oh, you can't fool me. It's turtles all the way down. And that's the phrase. It's turtles all the way down. You just start by putting a giant turtle under the earth, and the question of what it rests on, you just keep adding turtles all the way down. So we get these thoughts in our minds that this is how it should be. You know, I deserve this, I should have this, it should be easier than it is, this is how it's supposed to be, this is how relationships work, this is how money works, this is how health works. And when it doesn't happen, we just add another turtle. Until finally, we're really actually willing to ask the question, what is reality? For what end was I made? It takes a great deal of courage, creativity, all kinds of qualities that seemingly take time to develop before we'll actually ask those questions and then actually listen to the answer. And Swamiji says even, and this is kind of hard to understand, but even mental imbalance, lunacy, is an inevitable stage on the spiritual path. Wow. That everybody goes through, because at a certain point, when we begin to understand, or we begin to dimly perceive that so many of our cherished ideas are wrong, and that we have to be willing to accept a whole new understanding of reality, we just want to kind of like take a time out and see if this is really true. And we just retreat into a subconscious world for a while to see if it works, to see if it'll give us the happiness we seek. And it doesn't, because when we posit our own opinions against what is, opinions always lose. I mean, and nobody's doing anything to us. It's just we cannot declare a reality that doesn't exist. We have to attune ourselves to the reality that's there. And what's most important to remember, this comes to the end of it, passage through dim corridors of waking consciousness, to emerge at last into infinite light, into perfect joy. That's the irony, you might say, of the whole thing, is that we think we're running toward joy in our self-declared sense of reality. I want it to be morning, therefore it should be morning. And we think that we're running toward happiness, we're actually running away from it. That's why ever and again the awakened sons have to come. The example of Master, of Krishna, of Buddha, of Sri Ramakrishna, of Swami Kriyananda, of St. Francis of Assisi, of Mother Teresa of Calcutta, these awakened individuals, whether fully freed or merely so far advanced from us that they have much to teach us, they show us this is where happiness comes from. Sometimes those examples are terrifying. They just terrify us. How can that actually be happiness? To work that hard, to be that selfless, to give up your own desires, to just, how can that be happiness? So we get to go out and be in revolt for a little while longer. That's why it takes us so many lifetimes. Once our feet are planted, though, as Master said, once you have tasted nectar, you simply cannot be satisfied with rotten cheese anymore, as he put it always. You know, with something that's sour and spoiled. once you've tasted nectar. And think about how many things you've already outgrown in this lifetime. We all have many things that we've already outgrown. Just the other day, somebody had some birthday cake I've been a vegetarian and a health food fanatic since I was 20, which is really a long time. And I just don't, it's not that I have to discipline myself, I just don't like food that is devitalized. But I was somewhere and there was a little piece of this birthday cake, so I put a taste into my mouth. I remember I used to like it, that sort of thing. It was awful. It was just awful to my taste. But other people were gleefully enjoying it. So what was it? But my taste, because of the devitalized nature of it, even the sweetness couldn't compensate for it. And it just tasted bad to me. And see, that's what actually happens, and that's sort of hard for us to understand. It's not deprivation. You see a sadhu or an ascetic of some kind, you think it's deprivation. It's not deprivation. It's greater fulfillment. Mahatma Gandhi, who himself was so austere and was frighteningly austere from the point of view of many people, he said his advice, how to discipline yourself, never give up a pleasure, he said, until you have replaced it with what he called a higher pleasure. Which is, so it isn't going from suffering to suffering to suffering to suffering, and then somehow suddenly it turns into joy. It's going from joy to greater joy to greater joy to greater joy. But see, we get confused about that word joy, and in English it is confusing. Though in Sanskrit you would use the word ananda, which of course happens to be the name of our spiritual home also. But it's a classic word, and it means bliss. But it doesn't mean, I got to eat the whole birthday cake. I got pecan pie, which I do enjoy. Just whatever it might be. It's not because I got what I want. Ananda is unconditioned divine bliss, independent of all circumstances. So you go from ananda, you go from happiness to ananda, which you understand is a gigantic shift, and that's the shift you want. Just a moment, let me find this thought I had. Oops, it's gone again. So Gandhi talking about I know what I was going to say. The difficulty is, you see, in our unenlightened state, we think that happiness is pleasure and ease. And it's just sort of the way it seems. We want things that feel and seem pleasurable to us, and we want things that are easy. We think that if we put out less effort, we'll be happier. And this is such a deep and fundamentally and cellular delusion. It takes a great deal of conscious effort and awareness to perceive past it. It's a very good way to think about it. Austerity is not suffering. This is a mistake that the Christian interpretation makes, because Jesus was crucified. They think that being crucified makes you like Christ. No. It's being willing to sacrifice self, to find joy in sacrificing self for the good of others, and realizing that my life has meaning, because if I use it in a certain way, not only I, but the whole world can be uplifted by it. So even though Jesus' body was suffering, there are two definitions, two realities to it. He was crucified, he was tortured, he was humiliated, but it was purposeful. It was a deliberate and conscious sacrifice, and this gets into the esoterica of the Guru taking on the karma of his disciples, and in case of Christ, showing his absolute mastery of the human plane. So he allowed himself to go through all of that, but the end of the story was not dying on the cross, it was being resurrected. Resurrection is the message of Christianity, not crucifixion. However, it feels like crucifixion. And the other side of the life of Christ is that in his consciousness, he could transcend the physical experience he was happening and merely observe it without being affected by it. Masters are immune, completely immune to what happens to the physical body. accept that they take on the role. And now we're into something that is a big story that needs to be explained, but not right now. But the point is that it all leads to resurrection. And even that which appears to be sacrifice. Now, if you, let's say, I'll think of parents, because I know how spontaneously parents are willing to die and suffer for their children. It's just that the impulse is just implanted in them, especially in noble souls. But even if you aren't a parent, if there's someone that you love very deeply, and you know that if you endure a little bit of hardship, they will receive great upliftment. You know, is it even hardship to go through it? If the result is that someone you love will be greatly benefited? Is it, is it even suffering? It may not be easy, but is it even suffering? Viktor Frankl, who wrote the wonderful book, Search for Meaning, he created an entire a school of psychology based on his experiences of being in Auschwitz during the Holocaust as an Austrian Jew. He was there for a number of years. But he saw in the midst of that terrible suffering that if there was some understanding, if there was a reason for the suffering, then it ceased to be suffering. It might still be hardship. It might still be challenging, but it was entirely different. He spoke of just the prisoners that he knew, different examples, and how much power there was to endure if one knew that one was also creating good for those that one loves, whether it be the whole world, as in the case of Christ, or just a loved one, a dear and near loved one. The way a man could survive for the sake of his children, could survive for the sake of his wife. And so that's what we're really doing. And so when we're doing austerity, we're simply understanding that we are giving up a minor gratification for a greater gratification. I was going to say a moment ago, think of a world-class athlete and how that athlete has to train and the diet he has to follow and the disciplines he has to follow. And somebody watching it might think how deprived he is. But he or she may realize how fulfilled they are, or how fulfilled they are going to be because of all these days of discipline brings this result. So was that really suffering? Recently in our community we had this beautiful musical concert, and it was primarily Todd Billingsley on the piano and Keshav on the cello. Sai Ganesh was singing and Karen was singing and playing a little bit of the guitar also. You can find it on the internet. It was wonderful. It was just a couple of days ago, and we are now in February. So February 16, 17, something like that. Instrumental concert. Really, the recording came out well too. And after it was all over, I've known Keshava since he was a child, or I knew him when he was a child. And I heard more about having to learn to play the cello and how his mother would keep the time for them and perhaps modify a little bit to get them to practice longer. But after the concert, I'd go up to all these grown people, and I was thinking how many hours of childhood practice were required for them to do it. And they did not always enjoy their childhood practice, because very few children do. Karen did, but the others may not have as much. Karen said she was always eager to get better, so she would practice very assiduously. But all those hours of discipline created the capacity to make so much beauty. So what was hardship? What was suffering? You see, it's all in our perspective, and this is where the dawn of self-awareness. If we have the self-awareness to understand what is and what actions really lead to happiness and which really lead to suffering, then everything becomes different. And even just the mere fact that we think pleasure is pleasure and ease is pleasure, we gradually realize, no, it's not. one of the characteristics of Swami Kriyananda, which was so interesting to me, was that he did not enjoy low energy. You know, he didn't, when he wanted to relax, he relaxed upward. It was not that he always meditated or, you know, wrote books. He would read novels. He would take naps, and he would always have an exaggerated sense of his laziness when he actually just took a nap because he was exhausted from overwork or whatever it was. But he didn't seek unconsciousness. He always sought a refined and a higher vibration. And I learned a great deal from him just watching him in that way. He found unconsciousness, or tamasic energy, as we would call it, downward moving energy. He did not find it enjoyable. He just simply didn't. It wasn't a pleasure to him. You know, so he would watch a movie. He loved Bambi, for example. We all watched Bambi dozens of times. He liked movies that were refined. So when we watch a movie, it always had to be refined. It always had to be uplifted in some way. It didn't have to have a profound message, but it had to have refinement, because tamasic energy was not enjoyable to him. A whole day spent doing nothing. I dare say, with perhaps one or two exceptions, I never witnessed, of course I wasn't with Swami all the time, I didn't live in the same community as he lived in from 1987 on, but I certainly, in his company, never saw a day in which he didn't make some uplifting contribution to the world. Whether it was just in conversation, or in a phone call, or in an email, or in deep meditation. But he made some uplifting contribution to the world, and often a profound creative contribution to the world, because he had learned from many lifetimes of experience that that's where happiness comes from. Ever and again, through your awakened sons, the answer comes. The entire purpose of life is ever-increasing self-realization. So the more we move toward that, we passage through these dim corridors of waking consciousness to emerge at last into infinite joy. And just think about that. You know, the end of this whole story is just to move at last into infinite joy. So we, like this little bird, and then the next line in the Festival of Light, "O children of light, forsake the darkness." Isn't that something? O children of light, forsake the darkness. This is what all of this allegory of the bird leads to, which is this clarion call. We are children of the light. And this is a very important philosophical turn that self-realization offers us, that the festival affirms every time. We are children of the light. That we are not sinners who must be redeemed. We are children of the light who have gone out to play in the mud and have become covered with mud, but Divine Mother will pick us up and bathe us in light, and our pure and pristine nature will be revealed. So we are never separate from the light, and we are never unworthy of God's love. And we are never lost. O children of light, forsake the darkness. Give it up and turn toward the true source of joy. God bless you, my friend.